Witch in Charm's Way, a cozy mystery audiobook, written and narrated by R.K. Dreaming. Part 36. Petra gulped. Her eyes opened wide. But, she stammered. Her eyes flicked from me to her brother and then back to me again. Colour flooded into her cheeks. She had been caught in a lie and she knew it. "No," she said in a small voice, denying the lie. "Yes," Jasper insisted. "Nobody told us about Oberon Sr. and Lily. It looks like you guys are the only ones who know about that. So how are you going to prove that it's true?" "You can't prove that it's true, can you?" said Allegra. "Because if Oberon Sr. had been seducing Lily, he would have hidden it carefully. After all, he knows that the entire community would have turned against him. He would have been very careful about something like that." "Leave my sister alone," said Paolo. "You're twisting things up," snapped Lorcan. "You're confusing her." I ignored them and kept looking at Petra. I said, if Lily had begun to fall under the influence of his mesmerism, Oberon Sr. would have been even more careful, because it would have been a huge win for him, wouldn't it? I bet he's waited centuries to get a witch to fall under his mesmerism. Everyone knows vampires crave magic. He would have cherished Lily and been desperate to make her his own. He would never have killed her. She would have been too precious to him. Even as I said it, I realised this was true. My heart sank. I might be repulsed by Oberon Sr., but I knew that by my own logic, it couldn't have been him. If only it could have been him, the horrid man. Petra bit her lip. She looked like she was collapsing under the weight of our arguments. She sat down on the couch with a thump. She looked utterly defeated. "It was Oberon," she wailed. "Oberon Jr." Her brother sat down next to her and put his arm around her. His face had turned pale, and he looked defeated too. He nodded. "It was Oberon," he repeated. "Damn it," snapped Lorcan, looking accusingly at the other two. Paolo shrugged at Lorcan a bit resentfully. Lorcan was still standing up. His hands had gathered into fists. He looked furious about the trick we had just played on Petra. He was gritting his teeth. Petra raised her face from her hands and gave Lorcan a pleading look. He finally nodded grudgingly. "Oberon didn't mean to do it," he said in a quiet voice, like it hurt to betray his closest friend. My lip curled. I glared at him. "There's no point looking at me like that," he said. "I know that you'd prefer if it had been me, but it wasn't. It was Oberon." "Why?" I demanded. "Why would he have done it? He loved Lily." Lorcan nodded. He did love Lily. He loved her a lot. Even though he knew what his dad was doing with her, even though he knew she was messing him around all the time, he still loved her. "It was that security guard's fault," said Paolo. "Willie the Shank." His mouth twisted in disgust. "We were partying up on the roof at the construction site," said Lorcan. "We went there all the time to chill out after the club got a bit too much. And sometimes we'd see Willie the Shank there. Willie was such a loser. He was always trying to seduce the girls at the club and bring them up to the roof to have a private party, if you know what I mean." And he had his eyes on Lily, said Paolo. He fancied her. Everyone did. As if she would have ever gone with a creep like him, said Petra. She angrily wiped her tears away. He was always trying it on with her, and with me. Yuck! But he especially had the hots for Lily. She was so gorgeous. We all had the hots for Lily, said Paolo. His sister shot him an angry look. He shrugged. It's true, even me. What happened? Allegra asked. She shot me an apologetic look. She knew that I hadn't wanted it to be Oberon Jr. Willie the Shank followed us up to the rooftop, said Lorcan. He came over and started flirting with Lily, and Oberon got angry. He was right to get angry, said Petra hotly. Willie was an incubus, and we all knew when he started using his allure on Lily. It was disgusting. She didn't want it. If Willie had used his allure on Lily like that, it meant he didn't play by the rules. It made him more likely to be a dangerous incubus. That wasn't cool, said Paolo, looking sour. He used his allure on her, Petra repeated, as if she still couldn't believe it. The creep, she added in a fury. I could understand her anger. I would have been disgusted and furious if any incubus had done that to me. Lorcan was nodding in agreement, his mouth twisted as if just the memory of it tasted filthy. Oberon got mad. We all did. Lorcan sighed. But Oberon especially. You know how he felt about Lily. The moment he caught on that Willie was using his allure, he punched him. They got into a fight. It got really bad really fast, said Paolo. Oberon is crazy strong, but Willie was an incubus. He started using his hunger on Oberon. We were all shocked when he did it. I mean, you can't use hunger in that sort of fight. It's just not right. Paolo looked at Jasper as if Jasper would understand. Jasper nodded. He looked disgusted, as if what Willie had done was against the Baena code of honour. The Baena had their own unspoken rules and customs for how and when to use their allure or hunger, or the law-abiding ones did anyway. I shuddered. I had heard of what it felt like for the victim when an incubus or succubus used their hunger in anger. These days, doing such a thing was considered at the least extremely antisocial in polite circles, and at its worst verging on psychotic. Bringing hunger into a fist fight was like bringing a gun. What happened? I said. Did you intervene? Paolo shook his head regretfully. Before we could, Oberon realised what was happening. Willie was draining Oberon's life force so fast, and Oberon panicked. He must have known that he'd be unconscious soon, so he hit Willie really hard on the head. And it killed Willie. Then Oberon went mad, said Petra in a high voice. She was wild-eyed at the memory and shaking her head in bewilderment. He just went crazy. I think nearly dying like that must have been such a shock, and he was raging about it. And he turned on Lily. He said it was her fault, that she shouldn't have flirted with Willie, even though she wasn't. We knew that she wasn't. He wasn't thinking straight, said Lorcan quickly. It all got a bit too much for him, said Paolo. Oberon knew deep down that she'd been with his dad. He just snapped. Exactly, wailed Petra. And Lily made it worse. She said we had to go to the police. Why did she have to say that? Why should Oberon get into trouble because of a horrid loser like Willie? Oberon was defending Lily, and she should have been defending him. But she didn't, and I guess she didn't grow up here. She didn't know what it would be like for him. He was a vampire, and he'd killed an incubus. The Baena community would have been furious about it. They wouldn't have cared that Willie was a loser. We know what our own community is like. Oberon's whole life would have been ruined just for that. He didn't mean to kill him, said Paolo. It was an accident. And Oberon had already shoved Willie's body into the wet cement in the pool, said Petra. He'd been trying to cover up what he'd done, so it was too late to go to the police and say it was an accident. But Lily wouldn't listen. Her voice trailed off. We were all silent for a long moment. My heart was thudding. I hated what I was hearing. Go on, I said. Lily was screaming at him, said Petra, and Oberon went mad. I don't think he knew what he was doing. He went mad and he grabbed that weapon thing and he started attacking her. He was so strong and we couldn't stop him, and we were too scared to even try. And poor Lily was helpless against his strength, and it was over so quickly. It was so quick. She was dead. It was too late, said Lorcan angrily. What were we supposed to do? Oberon is a good guy. Anyone will tell you. We're his friends. Were we supposed to let him go to jail because of things getting out of control for one night? His whole life ruined for one night. He finally went to sit beside Petra and Paolo, his knees seeming to give way all at once. We had to cover it up, said Petra. We love Oberon, and anyway, none of us wanted to face his dad after that. If Oberon Sr. found out what really happened, he would have been so furious. You don't understand. He doesn't really care about Oberon Jr. All he cares about is prestige and power, and how what Oberon Jr. did would affect his money and his reputation and his business. We were too scared to say anything, all of us, even Oberon Jr. There was a long moment of silence as we all absorbed what they had said. Finally, it was Jasper who spoke. He said calmly, "You have to go to the police and give a statement about what really happened." Petra nodded tiredly. She sniffed and wiped her nose angrily with the back of her hand. She sighed deeply, like she wished she could undo it all. "We'll go now," she said. Hi, you've reached the end. Comment the code words, "Psych, I saw it coming," to confuse everyone who hasn't reached this part of the story yet. Thanks for playing along.